I was born in Wyoming, in a small town hidden among the hills, a place that is difficult to find on the map if you don't know where exactly to look. It was not even marked on all atlases. There stood an old farmhouse, the house in which I spent my entire childhood, and where now, 70 years later, I sit in a creaky rocking chair, listening to the autumn rain rustle on the roof. This is my parents' house. Here I took my first breath, and now, like the grin of fate, I am preparing to take my last. I don't have much time left. The doctors long ago pronounced a verdict: stage 4 cancer. But do you know what an interesting phenomenon? When you know that the days are numbered, peace and curiosity opens up in you at the same time, and also the power to remember everything. And now, sitting in a cozy chair, I allow myself to plunge into memories for the last time with my head. My father was a strong man, externally and internally. He worked at the mill. Every morning he got up in the dark, had breakfast, hugged me tightly, and went to work. And in the evening he returned covered in dust and a flower shroud. His hair was always blonde, but by the age of 40, as far as I remember, it became almost white. I remember how in the winter I ran after him around the yard, trying to help with chopping wood. He laughed, picked me up, and said, "Josh, son, very soon you will grow up and become stronger than me." And then I kept wondering how it was possible. He was huge, like a mountain, and suddenly I could outgrow him. Mom, on the contrary, was puny and short, but with such a temperament that she could calm anyone down with one phrase. She sewed clothes for the neighbors and for everyone around who asked. She was amazingly skilled at handling fabrics and threads. I often watched her, sitting on the floor at her feet, as she tapped the foot pedal of the sewing machine. Sometimes my mother would say, "Look, Josh, how important the details are. If one seam is weak, the suit may come apart at the seams at the most inopportune moment. Always do your job conscientiously. No favors for yourself." These words of hers became one of my life guidelines. We always had a little money, but the house was full of warmth and the smell of baking. In the evenings, when my father returned, tired, we sat down to have dinner by the fireplace. The firewood was crackling. Mom put hot pies or fragrant stews on the table from what she could get. Such moments seemed to me like something unshakable, eternal, as if it would always be like this: three at a round village table, my father's laughter, my mother's smile, and my endless curiosity about the world. Sometimes, having eaten too much, I would bury my nose in my father's warm sweater and fall asleep to the steady beating of his heart. Everything changed when I turned 12. My father was injured in the mill, the machinery caught fire, if I remember correctly, and he burned his hands so badly that he could no longer lift weights. The pain did not leave him even at night. Sometimes I woke up from his muffled moans in the next room. He tried to hide his suffering, but I saw how his face contorted when he took a spoon or tried to button the buttons on his shirt. This was a real tragedy for the family. We didn't have much money anyway, and then our regular income disappeared. My father could no longer work as before, and he was transferred to an easy job where they paid pennies. He rarely spoke about his pain, but a shadow settled in his gaze, longing for a past life where he was strong and needed. Now he sat for hours at the window, looking thoughtfully at the courtyard, as if he was trying to find a solution to our poverty there. Mom hardly slept, bending over an old sewing machine. At night, only her quiet, uniform knocking could be heard in the house, and it seemed to me that it merged with the beating of her heart. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, her shoulders hunched more and more, but she did not complain. Sometimes I saw her running her hand over her father's burned hands, whispering something comforting, but her eyes were full of anxiety. I hung around, trying to help. I cleaned the yard, carried water, somehow repaired the fence, if necessary. In general, I tried to be a man as best I could, despite my young age. I felt like I was growing up by leaps and bounds. There was no more time for games, only work, only caring for family. Sometimes in the evenings I listened to my parents breathing, checking if they were sleeping. And in these moments I understood especially acutely, life would not always be kind. But despite all the difficulties, we still had love. We ate together at the table, even if dinner was just Lenten porridge. Father still looked at Mother warmly, and she squeezed his hand. carefully avoiding the burns. At such moments, I realized how important it is that we hold on to each other and how important family is in every person's life. I hoped that in the future I could also build the same one. Every year I grew older, our entire neighborhood changed. Suddenly, the oil business began to actively develop. Rumors began to circulate about new fields, about people who came from different states to find work on drilling rigs. Everyone was talking about drilling rigs in Texas and North Dakota. We, village boys, listened to these stories with burning eyes because somewhere out there, very close, new opportunities opened up. I could sit for hours with my friends, listening to the conversations of old people who shook their heads indignantly. All these oil rigs will lead to disaster. They will trample our land, pollute our water. But for us teenagers, it was a chance to break out, earn money, maybe even become someone in this life. We dreamed of big money and independence, not yet realizing that they cost much more than it seems. At 16, I was already hanging around a small drilling company, helping to work with hoses and sometimes handing tools. Nobody officially hired me, I was too small, but when people understand that you are ready to work for pennies, and at the same time your hands grow from the right place, there will always be some uncle who will say, "Okay, guy, stay here," but so that no one sees. This is how I learned to understand the equipment, feel the ground under my feet, and understand those who devoted themselves to this difficult work. I saw how the men on the drilling shift became something like family. There, on dusty sites, they covered each other from their superiors, joked when tensions rose through the roof, and together they braved the heat and rain. When I returned home, I brought more machine oil stains on my jeans and sweater, and my mother was not at all happy, but she understood. I was looking for a way, looking for my place. At 18, I left. But before I did that, I got my high school diploma. I won't say that I was the best student. I rather gravitated toward practice and physical labor than toward memorizing paragraphs. But I tried. My mother was worried that, without studying, it would be more difficult for me to get out into the world. But my father believed that the most important thing was to be honest with God, people, and myself. Anyway, after graduation, I packed up my meager belongings, took some of the money they had worked hard to save, and went to technical college. The plan was simple: enroll, gain basic knowledge, and then officially get a job as an assistant driller with prospects and insurance. It seemed to my parents then that I was going to conquer the world, but I just wanted to prove that I was capable of something more. College was where I was exposed to many things for the first time. Firstly, this was my first acquaintance with a large number of people my age who came from different parts of the country. They were different. Some had already seen the world. Some owned their parents' money and treated studying as entertainment. I felt like a guy from the wilderness who walks around in shabby shoes and wears mended shirts because my mother saved on everything to give me a chance. But all this did not bother me. On the contrary, it spurred me on. I realized that if I want to achieve something, I have to work twice as hard as others. And I worked. I studied during the day, and sometimes at night I went out to unload trucks at the warehouse so that I would have something to live on. The living conditions were terrible. A room in an old dorm where the ceiling sometimes dropped, and the stench was unbearable if someone on the floor decided to smoke in the corridor. But this was my freedom, my formation. A couple of years in college flew by quickly. I learned the basics, met a couple of guys who also wanted to break into the oil field, and together we went looking for work. The first opportunity came before I even officially graduated. A company was looking for help for oil rigs in the northern part of the state. The work promised to be hard, a remote area, harsh climate, Spartan-style living conditions, as they said, but they paid more or less, and I didn't need anything else. I signed the contract without thinking twice. This is how my new stage began. We headed north, where snow-capped mountains juxtaposed with vast fields and oil rigs jutted out like steel giants marrying the landscape. But to be honest, this view fascinated me. Every day I felt like I was touching something great, the depths of the earth from which we pumped oil. I worked furiously and honestly. For this, I quickly began to be respected in the brigade, and even though I was 10 to 20 years younger than some of the men there, I had the skill and desire to learn. I watched how my senior comrades handled equipment, how they checked pressure, and how they behaved in extreme situations. Sometimes accidents, leaks, and malfunctions occurred on the tower. Any mistake could cost life, and everyone understood this. I learned not to panic, to pull myself together when the situation gets out of control. This hardening stayed with me forever, and it helped me out many times in later life, albeit not in the literal sense of saving me from an oil spill, but in an emotional and psychological sense. The years passed, and I changed along with them. In those days, I was still looking for my happiness, my place. Did I dream of a family? Probably yes. In the depths of my soul, I imagined that one day I would have my own house, where there would be a wife and, possibly, children, and we would live in comfort and drink tea on the veranda in the evenings. But all these dreams remained ghosts for a long time, because work took up almost all my time. Shifts for several days, dirt, danger, not every girl would agree to such a life. I have seen some colleagues' families fall apart. The wives could not stand the constant absence of their husbands at home, stress, and uncertainty. But there was another side. If a man brought enough money, some women put up with the situation, most importantly, feeling financial stability. Then I still did not understand what price this stability was paid for. It just seemed to me that everything could be combined if you really wanted to. I returned home after another shift, smelling of oil, road dust, and long weeks of work. My friends dragged me to a bar to celebrate my return, calling me the winner of the seas of oil. They joked like that, making fun of me for my lifestyle. The bar was small but cozy, with worn wooden tables, the smell of cheap whiskey, and dim lamplight. There was music playing somewhere in the corner, an old country ballad, something familiar, but I couldn't immediately remember the name. And then I saw her. Alice appeared as if the movement of air itself had brought her here, a light whirlwind brought by the wind of change. Laughing loudly and sparklingly, she entered the bar, and her laughter, like a crystal chime, drowned out even the loud music. People turned around for a moment, fascinated by this flash of life, but she seemed not to notice the attention to herself. Her red hair shone gold in the warm light of the lamps. Each strand shimmered with shades of flame from honey to deep amber. They fell in soft waves, now touching her cheekbones, now flashing in movement, as if nature itself had woven them from the rays of the sun. There was some inexplicable lightness in her movements. It was as if she was dancing even when she was just walking. Her steps seemed to not touch the floor, as if an invisible force was holding her on the edge between reality and a fairy tale. She wore a simple but perfectly fitting dress the color of ripe cherries, emphasizing the curves of her body, not provocatively, but with a subtle play of hints. Thin fingers moved to the beat of the music, as if conducting the world around her, and her lips, slightly touched by a mischievous smile, hid a secret that only she knew about. But what was most striking was her eyes. They shone like two green shards of glass, reflecting both fun and slight recklessness. There was something wild and free about them, like a creature that lives by its own laws, not recognizing the rules of others. As she looked around the room, a spark of challenge flashed in her gaze, like a player who has just entered a new game and knows that luck is on his side today. I froze. It was as if I had been hit with an electric current, not a sharp, painful discharge, but a deep, bone-piercing feeling that made my heart lose its rhythm for a moment. My chest suddenly felt tight, and the air around me thickened, as if the whole world had narrowed down to a single figure. All my life I did not believe in love at first sight. I considered it nonsense, a fairy tale for romantics. But at that moment I realized that I was wrong. I was mistaken to the point of stupidity, to the point of absurdity. I couldn't look away. She was like a phenomenon, something inexplicable, elusive, but completely real. Her whole appearance, from her red hair, as if burning in the light, to the slight curve of her lips, as if woven from laughter, was hypnotizing. It seemed to me that even the music in the bar had died down, that every sound and movement became secondary in comparison with it. "Hey, Josh, why are you hanging out?" One of my friends chuckled, slapping me on the shoulder, bringing me back to reality. "Come on, this is your finest hour." I just smiled wryly, trying to hide how my heart was pounding. Should I approach her? Yes, I was afraid to even breathe, let alone take the first step. Thoughts were confused, the body did not obey, and one single thought was beating in my head. If I move now, this obsession will dissipate, and I will lose her forever. But Alice noticed me first. She walked straight towards me. Her steps were light, almost dancing, and a cheerful light danced in her eyes, as if she knew some kind of joke that only she understood. The whole hall seemed to open up in front of her, but not because people were moving aside, but because at that moment only she existed for me. Alice stopped opposite, tilting her head to the side, and her red curls gently slid over her shoulder. I noticed how at the same time the corner of her lips twitched slightly, not just a smile, but a slight challenge, as if she was checking whether I could withstand this sudden contact. "Do you like this song?" she asked, pointing her chin towards the stage, where a country ballad was still playing from the speakers. I blinked, trying to collect myself, although my brain still refused to work in her presence. "Eh? Yes, it seems. Not bad." "Like?" she asked with feigned horror, her eyes wide open. "Oh no, don't tell me that you're one of those who can't enjoy good music." She laughed loudly, sparklingly, lightly. This laughter was like a glass of champagne in the semi-darkness, like sparks from a fire on a cool night. And I suddenly desperately wanted to hear it again and again, as if it were a sound without which the world could not exist now. Well, actually, I scratched the back of my head, trying to maintain at least a shadow of composure. I just didn't remember the name. She folded her arms over her chest, feigning sternness, but a smile was still hidden in the corners of her lips. "You need to improve your musical taste, friend." "I'll try, I promise," I grinned, feeling how my stiffness dissipated along with her playful tone. "Okay, I'll take your word for it." She leaned closer, and her lips curved into a conspiratorial smile that was as playful as it was challenging. Mischievous sparks flashed in his eyes, and his voice acquired almost theatrical seriousness. "But there is a more serious problem. I want to dance, but no one offers." She said it as if she was throwing down a gauntlet to me, like in the old duel novels. Well, I looked at my friends, feeling my heart beat an uneven rhythm. They could hardly contain their laughter, watching my attempts not to look like a complete idiot. One of them even demonstratively encouraged me with a gesture, saying, "Come on already," and the other leaned over to his neighbor and whispered something in his ear, barely hiding a grin. I took a deep breath, as if about to jump into icy water. "Let's dance." I gave her my hand, and she immediately put hers in it confidently, without hesitation, as if we had done this not for the first time, but 1,000 times before. We walked onto a tiny dance floor, where just a couple of people swayed lazily to the music. The light was muted, warm, casting soft reflections on the floor and walls. In this cozy twilight, Alice seemed even more unreal, either a ghost or a dream come true. She put her hand on my shoulder. Her touch was light, almost weightless, but I felt it in every cell. Her other hand was still in mine, and her fingers squeezed subtly, as if testing whether I would let her go or hold her tighter. I pulled her closer, and suddenly the whole world disappeared. There was no longer a bar, no friends, no noisy conversations in the background. All this disappeared into some distant, insignificant noise. It was only her warmth, her breath, her smell, which made me dizzy. It was fresh, like the morning air after rain, with notes of orange zest and something else, vaguely familiar but elusive. I had no idea how this evening would end, but one thing I knew for sure was that I would never forget this dance. "Josh, right?" she whispered. "Yes, and I'm Alice." I remembered her name forever. She smiled, and I realized that I was completely lost. Alice was full of life, courage, and some daring ideas. She was originally from a neighboring town, but at that time she was living with her cousin. She wanted to see the world, at least her home state, in a new way. She laughed loudly, sincerely, and this laughter touched me more than any beautiful words. There was such energy in her movements that I wanted to follow her anywhere. She was born into a family of school teachers, and according to her, her childhood was filled with books and dreams. Her father loved literature and often read to her before bed. "That's probably why I love words and stories," she once confided to me. But despite the family love of knowledge, Alice was drawn to something more. She didn't just want to read about adventures, she wanted to live them. After school, she tried to find herself. She worked as a waitress in a cafe near the highway, then got a job in a bookstore, but she didn't stay anywhere. She was attracted by the road, the new, the unknown. She dreamed of traveling, but so far her long trips were limited to neighboring states. "One day," she told me, "I will get in my car and drive to the ocean, even if I have no money. I just need to see him." And I understood her. She seemed like the wind to me, free, unpredictable. And I didn't know where this evening would take us, but I was sure of one thing. I didn't want to let her go. Our romance developed quickly. 6 months after we met, we got married. The wedding was modest. My parents arrived, brought a cake and some gifts, and on Alice's side only a couple of her friends and a cousin were present. Her parents could not come. Her father was seriously ill, and her mother could not leave him alone. Despite this, Alice remained cheerful, saying that the main thing for her was the two of us, and this day would be ours alone. The ceremony took place in a small church on the outskirts of the town where I grew up. The inside smelled of wax and incense, and the wooden benches creaked as the few guests sat down on them. The priest, an old man with a kind look, smiled at us as we stood in front of him. I held Alice's hand, feeling her fingers tremble. But she smiled, and there was something elusive in her eyes, a mixture of joy, excitement, and a cheeky sparkle that I loved so much. "Are you ready?" I whispered to her. "Stupid question, Josh," she laughed, squeezing my hand tighter. I thought, this is my family, my new meaning in life. When we exchanged rings, I felt as if a warm confidence settled in my heart. The ring on her finger flashed in the ray of light breaking through the stained glass window. It was simple, without unnecessary decoration, but it was ours. After the ceremony, we went outside, where we were greeted by a cool autumn wind. "So, Mrs. Harper, how is it to be married to a man like me?" I teased her, hugging her shoulders. "I don't know yet, but I'm sure it won't be boring," she smiled, brushing her red strands out of her face. In a small clearing next to the church, tables were set modest but cozy. Mom baked her signature apple pies. Dad brought a bottle of homemade whiskey. One of the friends brought in an old gramophone, and the record began to play an old country tune with a slight crackle. I watched Alice laugh with her cousin, straighten the folds of her simple white dress, and catch a snowflake with her lips, the first sign of the approaching winter. She was beautiful. We knew that there was a lot of work ahead of us before we could build our own house, and for now we decided to settle in a small house on the outskirts of the city, which was rented to us by an old friend of my father. It was a temporary shelter, but we didn't care. The main thing was that we were together. We started building a house not far from where my parents lived. Village life might seem measured and boring, but I was fascinated by the mountains on the horizon, clean air, and endless open spaces. Alice also said that she loved these landscapes. When we first arrived here together, she stood at the top of a small hill, looked around, and took a deep breath. "This is amazing, Josh," she said then, her voice ringing with delight. "It's like breathing differently here." I took her hand and smiled. "So you agree?" She laughed and nodded. "Yes, let's build our life here." These were bright days. We chose a place for the house, argued about the project, imagined what it would be like when everything was ready. Alice drew sketches in her notebook, sometimes sitting right on the grass. She wanted us to have a spacious living room with huge windows through which we could see the mountains. "Imagine," she said, running her finger over the paper. "In the morning we will wake up from the sunlight, and in winter we will sit by the fireplace, covered with a blanket." I hugged her shoulders, watched her draw with inspiration, and felt that this was happiness. Our temporary home was small but cozy. The first months here were filled with laughter and warmth. We got up early, had breakfast on the porch, listening to nature wake up. Alice started a small garden, took care of flowers, and even tried to grow vegetables, although she sometimes complained that her hands were in the wrong place. Maybe I should just do the interior design and leave the land to you. She laughed, wiping the dirt from her cheeks. I pulled her towards me and ran my finger along her nose, leaving a trace of dirt there. And I think it suits you. She jokingly pushed me in the side, but her eyes sparkled with happiness. In the evenings, we sat on the porch, drank tea or wine, and looked at the stars. Sometimes she would lay her head on my shoulder, and I would feel the world stand still. "I love you, Josh," she whispered. "I love you too," I answered, squeezing her hand. Then it seemed to me that we had everything. But over time, I began to notice her anxiety. She increasingly looked at the road leading to the city, lingered on the phone, talking with one of her friends. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch, she suddenly said, "Josh, have you ever thought that the world is so big?" I looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" I just, "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to live somewhere else. Travel, see other countries." I chuckled and took a sip of beer. "Aren't we creating our own world right here?" I asked. "We are building a house, our life. Isn't this enough for you?" She didn't answer right away. "I just don't know, Josh," she finally said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not ready to stay here forever." At the time, I took it for normal anxiety. I thought that over time everything would settle down, that when the house was ready, she would love this life just like me. I worked on an oil rig, went on shifts, but always returned to her. He brought money, bought furniture, and did everything to make us comfortable, and it seemed to me that she accepted this reality. But one problem darkened our happiness. We found out we couldn't have children. It started with months of waiting. Then there were tests, examinations, endless tests. "Are you sure it's worth doing so many tests?" she asked one day, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Maybe we should just accept that it's not time yet." The doctor's response was a blow. The problem was me. I felt like I was missing something important. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, trying to wrap my head around it. "Alice, I..." The words got stuck in my throat. She came up to me, hugged me from behind, placing her head on my shoulder. "It doesn't matter, Josh," she whispered. "The main thing is that we have each other." I wanted to believe her, but I saw how she looked at the neighbors' children, how long I spent looking at babies in stores. One day, I cautiously suggested, "We can try to adopt." She looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. "I don't know, Josh. I need to think." Now it seems to me that something has changed somewhere since then. Around this period, when we finally knew that we would not be able to increase our family, I began to notice that Alice began to leave for the city more and more often. At first, this was understandable. She traveled around trying to find a job, saying that she wanted to at least occupy herself with something. Then the explanations became more vague. "I need to unwind," she said, putting on her favorite dark blue coat. "I'll go to the store, maybe have coffee with a friend." I saw no reason to doubt it. I took it all on faith. I wanted to believe that Alice was just bored sitting at home, while I was once again going on shift. Moreover, the house we built was exactly as I had imagined it, spacious, with thick wooden walls, smelling of fresh wood and varnish. A kitchen with a large oven, wide windows allowing soft morning light into the house, and a cozy bedroom where we were to begin the next chapter of our lives. We had chosen this house together, but now it seemed to me that for Alice it had become not a place of comfort, but a cage. I was focused on work, on getting all the little things done, finishing the porch, putting up the fence, finishing the interior trim. And when she left, I thought, let her be distracted, she needs a change of scenery. But every week her absences became longer. "You won't be late, will you?" I asked one day, hugging her shoulders before leaving. "Of course not." She smiled and quickly kissed me on the cheek. "I won't be long." But I knew that this short time increasingly turned into several hours, and sometimes almost a whole day. In the evenings she returned silent, sometimes nervous, and sometimes strangely animated. I tried to convince myself that it was just fatigue, that everything is the same as before. But gradually, even in bed, I began to notice changes. There used to be passion between us. Her desire could flare up suddenly. She would come up to me in the middle of the kitchen when I was having dinner, wrap her arms around me, and, looking into my eyes, whisper, "Drop everything, Josh. I need you right now." I couldn't resist. At such moments, we forgot about everything, tearing off each other's clothes without waiting for the bedroom. We didn't care that the bed wasn't made or that the candles on the bedside table weren't lit. Now she turned away more and more often when I pulled her closer at night. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Sorry, Josh. Tomorrow, okay?" But tomorrow nothing changed. I lay next to her, listening to her even breathing, and felt an invisible wall growing between us. I was once sure that I knew her down to the last mole, to every shade of her mood. Now it seemed to me that I was losing her, and she didn't even try to explain this to me. Then she found a job. At first, this seemed like good news. Alice was excited and said that this was exactly what she was missing. Josh, you won't believe it. Her eyes were burning when she returned home one evening. I got the job, in the office in the very center of the city. They said my skills would be a perfect fit. I smiled, genuinely happy for her. "This is wonderful, Alice. What will you be doing?" "Administrative work, documents, coordination of meetings. But the main thing is the atmosphere. There are so many interesting people there, such conversations." She talked about her new colleagues, about how she liked to be among people, participate in discussions, and feel needed. The day came when I arrived from my shift ahead of schedule. Our flights were canceled due to problems, and we were sent home for the week. I didn't complain. Today was our anniversary. I imagined how Alice would be delighted by the surprise. I would enter the house, she would throw herself on my neck, her eyes would light up with happiness. We will open the wine, sit on the sofa, remembering our first evening together. I got out of the taxi, holding a fresh bouquet of her favorite white lilies in my hands. The cold air burned my face. The wind blew dry leaves across the yard, raising them in whirlwinds. The windows are dark. Neither the warm light of the lamps nor the sound of her steps. I looked around. There was no car. I froze for a second, as if my brain was trying to reconcile reality with expectation. Shouldn't she be home? I pushed the door. Silence. Everything was in place, but there was some kind of emptiness in the air. A feeling of subtle disorder that was not there before. I walked through the rooms. He paused in the bedroom for a moment and looked at her side of the bed. "The pillow is cold. Where is she?" At first I wasn't worried. Maybe she went out to the store or to the neighbors. But half an hour passed. Hour. No call, no message. I started calling my friends. "Hi, Tom. Do you know where Alice is?" "Josh? Alice? No, I didn't see her." "What happened?" "No, nothing. I just can't get through to her." "Okay, thanks." I hung up the phone and felt something tremble unpleasantly inside. I called Karen, her best friend. "Hi, Karen. Listen, did you meet Alice today?" "Oh, Josh, no, I haven't seen her for a long time." "Didn't she tell you where she went?" "No. I just came back earlier and she wasn't at home." "Strange. Maybe she went to the city." I thought about it. To the city? On a day off? Alice always told me about her plans. She loved to share little things, what she would do, who she would meet. If she was going somewhere, I knew about it in advance. There was a strange, unpleasant lump in my chest. I looked at the phone. Not a single message. Not a single one missed. Time passed slowly, like syrup flowing down glass. I walked around the house, mechanically rearranging things on the table. The bouquet of lilies remained on the stand, not put away in the water. The clock showed 7 in the evening when the front door slammed. "Josh." Her voice was ringing, a little excited. "Are you home already?" "Yes. Arrived earlier." "Where have you been?" She froze for a second, as if gathering her thoughts. "In the city. I went on business." I looked at her more closely. An expensive dress is not her style. I asked her a direct question. "Where have you been? With whom?" She answered evasively, like, "Yes, I was just shopping with a friend." But I was not convinced. However, I did not start a scandal. I loved her, blindly believed that she would not betray me. But that night after her return was difficult. I lay in bed, listened to her breathing, and realized that there was some kind of abyss between us. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't say a word. I guess I was afraid to face the truth. Many men say that the bitter truth is better than doubt, but in reality, it is torment. We create a cozy lie for ourselves, holding on to it like a drowning man holding on to a piece of board. We cling to hope, even if deep down we know that the ship has long since sunk. I looked at the ceiling, counted the beats of my heart, felt her breathing next to me, and knew that something was broken. Not now, not tonight, but before, and I was too blind to notice, or he just didn't want to see. When I left for my shift, thoughts about what was happening to Alice did not leave me alone. I tried to drown out my anxiety with work, but every free moment my mind returned to her evasive answers, late returns, and that cold look I noticed in her eyes. I decided that the next time I came home, we would sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk. I wanted to figure out what was going on in her life, in our marriage. I entered the house, throwing my bag at the threshold, and immediately felt something elusively alien. There was a faint aroma of expensive perfume that did not belong to Alice in the air. A mixture of oak moss, tobacco, and whiskey. My chest felt unpleasant, but I forced myself to take a step forward. A stranger was sitting in the living room. Tall, well-groomed, in a perfectly fitting expensive suit, he sat on my sofa looking as if this house belonged to him. In one hand, he held a glass of whiskey, my whiskey, and with the other, he lazily touched the armrest, like an imposing owner of the estate. A slight half-smile played on his face, a complete absence of awkwardness, only calm, self-satisfied confidence. And Alice stood nearby. With a slight blush on the cheeks, her hand almost weightlessly touched this man's shoulder, and there was not a drop of accident in this touch. When she saw me, there was no fear, no guilt, or even surprise in her eyes. Just strong determination. "Josh," she said calmly, as if everything that was happening was the most ordinary thing. "Meet Harry, new investor in our company." I felt my heart beat faster, thumping dully in my temples. Anger grew in his chest, but for now it was cold, like a steel blade. I turned my gaze to Harry. He stood up and extended his hand to me, but I didn't even move. Tall, a head taller than me, 10 years older, with a well-groomed beard and the eyes of a man who is used to getting what he wants. "Nice to meet you, Josh," he said, as if we were old friends. I didn't answer. My chest felt heavy, my palms were sweaty, my fingers involuntarily clenched into fists. Everything was raging inside, but I felt that I was still in control. For now. "I wanted to tell you last time, but I was afraid," Alice continued, tilting her head to the side, assessing my reaction. There was no remorse in her voice, only firmness. "Josh, I love him. He can give me more than you. In every way, a beautiful life, travel, freedom. And then, when we enjoy it all, maybe even children." Something broke inside me. It was as if someone had suddenly turned off the sound around them. I looked at her, at Harry, at their mutual understanding written in every glance, in every movement. Everything suddenly became dull and muffled, as if I was in the center of a hurricane, where everything is rushing, and you just stand there and cannot breathe or think. Then anger came. I felt how it spread throughout my body, how my muscles tensed, how everything inside began to boil. I clenched my fists so hard that my nails cut into my palms. "Are you kidding me?" I barked, looking straight into her cold eyes. The voice trembled, not from fear, but from rage. "You brought your bastard into my house." Harry raised an eyebrow, but before he could even open his mouth, I stepped forward without holding back. "You're just stupid, corrupt." The words got stuck in my throat, but I forced myself to finish. "Are you throwing away everything we've built for this cheap stunt in an expensive suit?" Alice shuddered, but almost immediately pulled herself together. She looked at me with slight regret, but it was not regret about what she had done, rather, that I did not understand her choice. "Josh, don't make a scene," she muttered. "It's all decided, just accept it." I chuckled hoarsely, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. "Accept? Are you out of your mind?" Do you even understand what you are saying right now? I took a step forward, but then Harry raised his hand, stopping me. The movement is calm, confident, like that of a person who knows that he cannot be touched. "Come on, no nonsense, buddy," he said. "Everything has already been decided. You can't offer her what I can." His calmness was even more infuriating. It was so dismissive, so condescending, that real hatred flared up in my chest. "What can you give her?" I barked, gritting my teeth. "Another picture from an advertisement for an expensive watch. An illusion?" Harry grinned, took a slow sip of his whiskey, and licked his lips as if enjoying the taste of my own drink. Are you ready to offer her the life she dreams of?" I turned my gaze to Alice. She looked at me without regret. Not a trace of doubt, not a trace of remorse. Only hardness. She really decided everything for herself. I felt the despair growing, but the anger was stronger. I turned around, grabbed Alice's bag, and threw it forcefully towards the door. "Get out, both, get out of my house." Alice looked at me for another second. Something flashed in her eyes, but then she silently turned away. Harry just shrugged, finished his whiskey, carefully placed the glass on the table, and headed out, not even bothering to take a last look at me. He left like a man who had already won. I watched as the door slammed behind them, and at that moment something broke inside me. I sank into a chair, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness filling every cell of my body. I didn't immediately realize how long I sat there. It seemed as if time had stood still. The whiskey that Harry hadn't finished was on the table. I took it in my hand and looked at the amber liquid. Then he abruptly threw the glass at the wall. Glass shattered on the brickwork, alcohol flowed down the wall, leaving a dark mark. The anger I felt gave way to emptiness. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. My life had just been divided into before and after. Next divorce and no doubts. While we were preparing the documents, I played the role of a person who could easily be replaced with a new husband. I signed papers, went to meetings with a calm demeanor, and tried not to show my true feelings. Harry showed up at our house a couple of times, supposedly to talk about the financial aspects of the divorce, and I wanted to knock all the arrogance out of him, but I paused, looking mockingly at his expensive jacket and patent leather shoes. He was sure that I was an ordinary hard worker who had neither money nor connections, and therefore no chance against him. But he didn't know that those years on the oil rigs gave me more than just calluses on my hands. In this industry, rumors travel faster than electricity, and if you have a couple of good friends, they can help you find out everything you need about a person. For some reason, I was sure that this man was playing a foul game, but for now, I could only watch. To my surprise, Alice gave up all rights to our home and property. During one of her conversations with a lawyer, she said almost casually, "I don't need anything, Josh. The house, the land, everything remains to you. Harry will take care of me, and we will have a new life." I looked at her, trying to figure out if she really thought that way, or if she was just trying to quickly break off all ties with me. "Do you give up everything so easily after so many years?" I asked with a cold grin. She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I want to move on. It was all yours, Josh. I just want something different." I remained silent, although anger was boiling inside me. Her indifference finished me off much more than any of her barbs or attempts to justify herself. She just gave everything away as if it had no value, as if I myself had never had any value to her. Harry sat nearby, lounging in a chair, lazily looking at us, like a spectator at the theater. His smugness was getting on his nerves. "That's actually a good decision, Josh," he said with false goodwill. "We are all adults. Why cling to the past?" I clenched my fists, but again said nothing. So be it. If she wants to throw it all away like unnecessary trash, well, let her go. I can only benefit from this. But deep down I already knew. Their happiness would not last long. And when that happens, I won't even have to do anything. Life itself will put everything in its place. "Okay, Alice," I finally said, looking her straight in the eyes. "Then let's finish this as quickly as possible. The sooner you disappear from my life, the better. She shuddered, but immediately returned to her indifferent appearance. Harry just grinned, as if he was enjoying my condition. "Don't worry, Josh," he said, getting up from his chair. "I'll take care of her." I didn't answer. He simply turned around and left the room, leaving them alone. Perhaps I was for a certain time a naive man who believed in the love and devotion of his wife. But when my eyes opened, I understood perfectly well. Harry is not an angel. Such people always have some kind of skeleton in their closet. My goal was simple: to destroy his life the same way he destroyed mine. Yes, she made her own choice. No one forced her. But this man took advantage of my absence, my naive faith. And although I was bursting with rage, I decided that the best revenge was not a bullet, not a fight, but the methodical destruction of his reputation and money, which he valued so much and believed that with it, he could replace me in my own marriage. Money and connections are the basis of his power and attractiveness. Deprive him of this, and he will turn out to be nothing. I knew that I had to act carefully. Direct confrontation would only strengthen his self-confidence. Instead, I started working from the shadows. "Are you sure you want to get involved in this?" asked Ray, my old friend from the rig, when I told him my plan. "This is a tough game, Josh. People who have money know how to defend themselves." "Everyone has weak points," I answered, lighting a cigarette. "I don't need to kill him. You just need to make sure he buries himself." Ray nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I have friends at the tax office. They can look at his affairs if there is an interesting reason for them." "Give them a reason." I exhaled smoke, looking into the night sky. "Find a clue, anyone. I need to know where he screwed up." While Ray was dealing with the official side of the issue, I reached out to people who could dig even deeper. Through old connections, I connected with journalists who were always looking for sensations. "Listen," said one of them, Dan Harris, with whom we were sitting at the bar. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm not going to drown him, Dan," I grinned, taking a sip of whiskey. "I'll just open the floodgates a little. He will drown himself." In a matter of weeks, I had established a network of people, each of whom knew only a small part of what I was planning. But together it formed a clear pattern. Harry had to face inspections, blocking of accounts, scandals. And all this, by chance, at the same period, so that he would not have time to spread the straw anywhere. I knew the moment was close when Ray called me one evening. "Josh, we found something." I grinned, feeling icy satisfaction welling up inside me. "Then let's start the show." Alice seemed to be euphoric. She lived with Harry in his country house, wore expensive dresses, and attended fashionable parties. Sometimes she would briefly sign the remainder of our divorce papers, looking at me with lazy condescension. "When it's all over, we can finally go our separate ways and live our own lives," she said with a slight smile, as if it was a formality that had no meaning to her. I nodded, muttered something like, "Of course, Alice, I'm glad you're happy," but inside I was seething. There was not a drop of regret or a shadow of emotion in her voice, only the satisfied calm of a woman who is sure that she made the right choice. "You've settled in well," I said one day, holding a pen in my hands, preparing to sign one of the documents. "It must be nice to forget everything we had so easily." She looked at me slightly mockingly, tilting her head to the side. "Josh, don't be petty. We both knew that everything was leading to this. Yes, I loved you, but really what else could you give me?" "Are you just stupid, Alice?" I looked up at her. Alice sighed. "You can be as angry as you want, but the fact remains, I want a better life. You were always too focused on work, on your home, on this boring routine. Harry gave me the opportunity to get out of this." "You're not getting out, Alice." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "You just jump into a cage upholstered in velvet." She didn't answer. I just shrugged and turned my gaze to the windows of the lawyer's office, as if I was no longer part of her world. I already knew then, a little more and their happiness would collapse. Harry had no idea what kind of hurricane was approaching him. According to my information, he had dubious transactions abroad, fictitious contracts, and no one noticed all this so far. but it was only necessary to slightly direct the interest of the competent authorities in his direction, and he would fall under the spotlight, from which he could only go blind and run away. The blow was swift. First, there was news that the tax inspector had come to Harry's company and discovered some violations. Then the investors to whom he promised mountains of gold suddenly refused to continue financing after learning about the investigation. One of my acquaintances, accidentally, revealed to journalists information about a series of frauds related to unaccounted income, and the newspapers burst into loud headlines. Harry tried to resolve everything through his people, but the shit had already hit the fan. All his attempts to put out the flames only led to an even greater flare-up of the scandal. The competent authorities became even more wary, began to check the inspectors, dismissals, arrests of accounts, and blocking of transactions rained down the chain. I, of course, do not pretend that I did everything alone. It's just that, by chance, each thread stretched to the next, and so the whole ball began to unwind. Harry soon found himself on the verge of bankruptcy. His reputation went downhill. Those who had recently shaken his hand with a smile began to avoid him like someone with the plague. Nobody wanted to be involved in a story of fraud. I can't say that I was happy in the literal sense, but I was filled with a feeling of satisfied justice. He destroyed my family, and I destroyed his world of false glitter and connections. The money is gone, and along with the money, the so-called friends are gone. The most interesting thing is that he did not wait for a complete collapse. As soon as he realized that the situation was hopeless, he left Alice, the same woman with whom he had great love and passion. He left her in his country house with debts, loans, and closed accounts. When everything began to fall apart at the seams, he simply packed his bags and fled from the authorities to save what was left of his skin. Forgetting about your great love. Ironic, isn't it? Alice seemed to have fallen into an abyss. Her world, which she had once chosen, seduced by the promises of a carefree life, blinded by the brilliance of expensive jewelry and the sweetness of forbidden pleasures, now crumbled like a house of cards. Everything for which she betrayed our love turned to dust in an instant. The blow was crushing her. New life collapsed, leaving only ruins, among which she was left alone, helpless and disgraced. The local press did not spare her. Newspaper and internet headlines were full of merciless wording. The fraudster's ex-wife, fall from heights, Alice Brain from socialite to outcast. All her past acquaintances, with whom she reveled side by side at elite receptions, now looked through her as if through glass. Their well-groomed faces turned away, their trained smiles disappeared at her mere appearance. In the highest circles, the doors closed in front of her with a dull, offensive knock. After all, who would want to get involved with a woman whose reputation is tarnished by scandal? She tried to fight, tried to find at least some support, but everything turned out to be in vain. Harry once assured her that she would no longer have to work, that she was not created for the office routine, but for an idle life, and she, seduced by his speeches, easily abandoned her previous career without thinking about the consequences. Now, when she tried to return to a professional environment, she was politely but firmly shown the door. Understand, after such a high-profile case, you understand that our company cannot afford to risk its reputation. These words became a death sentence for her. She left one office after another, feeling the doors closing behind her forever. And then, perhaps for the first time, she truly felt what it meant to be isolated. Not just lonely, but cut off from the world. Her phone, once bursting with calls and messages, now lay silent, like a useless piece of plastic. Her friends, who had recently admired her life, disappeared, dissolved, as if they had never existed. Not a single call, not a single attempt at support. Silence. A booming, piercing silence. And it was at that moment, in this devastation and fear, that she remembered me. About a man whom she once betrayed for the sake of a ghostly dream. Now I was her last hope, the last connecting thread with the past, in which she was not the wife of a swindler, but simply Alice the beloved, the real one. She called and wrote. She left long, confusing messages in which her voice trembled with despair. She asked for help and forgiveness, said that it was a mistake, and she was just confused about the fact that she loved me. But I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear her pleas. I didn't want to read her frightened words. My heart was closed to her the same way she once did to me. One day she showed up at my house while I was already planning to sell it. She was standing on the porch when I came out. I saw her shifting from foot to foot, fiddling with some kind of purse in her hands. Her face was haggard, her makeup was missing, her eyes were red from crying. She said quietly, "Hi, Josh. We need to talk." I looked at her and suddenly realized that I no longer felt anything. No anger, no pain, just calm and cold indifference. She started talking about how everything fell apart for her, how she realized her mistake, that all this luxury is an illusion, that the real value was in what we had. She said that she was ashamed, that she believed that we could try to restore everything, start over, that she needed me. I listened without interrupting, looked at her face, and thought about how much pain I suffered when she left me. But this pain no longer dominated me. Revenge was accomplished, and her betrayal ceased to be the center of the world for me. I already had other goals and plans. I didn't want to go back to the past. When she finished speaking, I paused. My heart didn't waver for a second. I said quietly, "It's not me you want. You need what I could give you. But this is no longer the case. Just like us." I closed the door in her face. I hurt her son, but I didn't care. What's the point of feeling sorry for a person who only felt sorry for himself? After I packed my things, sold the house, and completed all the formalities with the divorce, I did not stay in those places. They were no longer mine, too many memories, too many shadows of the past. I went south to where the air smelled of salt, where the waves always whispered their stories to the shore, where I could start with a clean slate. I bought myself a small boat repair shop on the coast. I have always liked water, although I spent most of my life not near the sea, but on drilling platforms where the smell of oil mixed with the heavy air. But there, on the ocean shore, life was different silence, interrupted only by the cries of seagulls and the splash of waves, measured work, simple joys. My workshop was small but cozy, a garage door that opened directly onto the bay, several tables with tools, shelves with spare parts, and the smell of wood, resin, and motor oil. Repairing boats has become something of a therapy for me. I didn't have much experience in ship repair, but my technical background, ability to work with my hands, and the habit of not giving up helped me quickly get the hang of it. I received clients, local fishermen, tourists, pleasure boat owners. The people here were simple and friendly. It was easy to get along with them. In the evenings, I went to a coastal bar, drank beer, listened to the stories of old sailors, and was in no hurry to get anywhere. Then it seemed to me that I didn't need a new family or novels. I got used to loneliness and considered it not a tragedy, but freedom. But life has an amazing ability to give unexpected gifts, even when you're not looking for them. We met by chance. She came to the workshop with a request to repair the outboard motor on a small boat that she inherited from her father. The boat was old, but it was clear that it had special value for her. "Do you think something can be done?" she asked, frowning slightly, as if she was afraid of being refused. "I think so," I answered, examining the engine. "There's nothing critical here, they just haven't been served for a long time." She smiled with relief. Little did I know then how much that smile would change my life. Catherine turned out to be local. She lived in a small house near the coast and worked as a teacher at school. She had a daughter, Olivia, who had recently turned 8. When she came to pick up the boat, we started talking. At first a little, then more. It turned out that she was married, but she and her ex-husband diverged. No dramas, no scandals, they just realized that they wanted different things from life. He remained a good father for Olivia, came to her, and helped. It was the right choice, she said then, looking thoughtfully at the water. "It's better to separate than to torment each other." I nodded. I knew what she was talking about. We started dating gradually. No rush, no promises. I didn't rush things, and neither did she. We were just there for each other. Olivia resembled her mother, the same blonde hair, the same inquisitive eyes. She looked at me warily at first, but curiosity took over. "Do you know how to repair boats?" She asked one day when Catherine came into my studio with her daughter. I can. How about building a new one? This is more complicated. But will you try? I chuckled. Let's see. She thought for a moment, assessing my answer, and then nodded as if approving. From that moment on, she stopped avoiding me. Over time, I realized that I liked spending time with her. We walked along the beach. I showed her how to properly tie C-knots and told her about engines. She listened carefully and sometimes asked questions. One day, I brought my broken bicycle to the workshop and said, "If you can fix boats, you can fix a bike." I laughed but agreed. We found a common language easily. I never tried to replace her father. She had one, and a good one. But I could be there, be a friend, be a person she trusted. With Catherine, everything was simple. She didn't demand the impossible from me, didn't put pressure, didn't try to change me. We spent time together, laughed, talked about everything in the world. I felt like I could be myself with her without masks, without having to make excuses for my past. Over time, I realized that I could no longer imagine life without her and Olivia. We didn't become a family right away, but when it happened, everything was natural, as if it was meant to be. I never thought I would have a life like this again. I once thought that loneliness was my freedom, but it turns out that true freedom is when you have a place where you always want to return. Now I had everything I dreamed of: a quiet, measured life, a beloved woman, a child who was not related to me by blood, but became dear to me in spirit. Some mornings, when I went out to the ocean, breathed in the fresh air, and listened to the waves gently touch the shore, I thought that I had finally found my harbor. Many years have passed. I was no longer young when I first noticed that I was getting sick more often. At first it was mild fatigue, periodic cough, and sometimes strange pain in the side. I attributed everything to age, to hard work, to the consequences of old wounds that life left on the body and soul. But one day it became really bad: a sharp fever, weakness, a suffocating cough. Catherine insisted that I go to the hospital, although I resisted. She has always been like this, soft, but unbending, able to insist on her own way so that I had no choice. At the hospital, doctors did an examination and took tests. I remember that day: the cold light of the lamps in the corridor, the muffled conversations of the nurses, the smell of sterility, which made me sick. When the doctor finally entered the room, his face already said everything for him. He sat down opposite me, bowed his head, and spoke quietly, as if he was apologizing. "We found a tumor. The diagnosis is cancer at the 4th stage. Metastasis." His voice sounded muffled, but I felt nothing, neither horror nor despair. Only a strange fatigue that has become familiar over the past months. I looked at Catherine and saw pain in her eyes. She squeezed my hand tightly, almost to the point of pain. At that moment, I realized that I didn't want to fight. I don't want chemotherapy that will make me a shadow of myself. I don't want endless ifs, hospital beds, pitying looks from doctors and nurses. "I will not undergo treatment," I said calmly. The doctor looked at me with sympathy, but did not object. They are probably used to such decisions. "You are sure?" Catherine whispered, and there was a plea in her voice. I covered her hand with mine. "Yes." She didn't cry. She didn't try to persuade her, didn't scream, as other wives might have done. She simply took a deep breath, as if resigned, and nodded. For some reason, I wanted to return to my father's home, and Catherine supported me. I didn't sell it, although I could have. Over the years, it became dilapidated. The paint was peeling, the windows were covered with dust, but the foundation stood strong like a memory of the past. This is where I grew up. Here my father and I once expanded it, adding a new room. Here my mother taught me perseverance, but not cruelty. It smelled of pies, rain, and wood. Catherine had no doubt that we would go there. She helped pack things and organize the move. Olivia was already an adult and living her own life, but when she found out about my decision, she supported it. "I'll come," she said, "as often as possible." I knew it was true. Olivia has always been like this, caring, understanding. From her youth, she treated me with respect, even if she did not always share my views. The road home was long, but at some point I felt something inside me letting go. It's as if this whole noisy, hectic world was left somewhere behind, and there was only peace ahead. When we finally arrived, the house greeted us with silence. I stood at the gate and examined him. It seems to have become smaller than in my memory. Or is it me who has become different? We need to clean up, Catherine said, shaking herself. She always found something to do. Even now, when we actually came here to wait for my last day, she did not allow herself to be despondent. I ran my hand along the railing of the old porch. The wood was rough, but warm. Yes, it is necessary. We got to work together. Despite my weakness, I helped as much as I could. I took out the trash, put old furniture in order. Catherine opened the windows, letting fresh air in, washed the dust, scrubbed the floors. I laughed looking at her. You act like we just bought this house. We slept in the same bed, as always. I fell asleep listening to her breathing, feeling the warmth of her hand in mine. Autumn here was just as I remembered it. In the morning, the air smelled of wet grass and smoke from distant fires. During the day, the sun sparkled on the withered leaves, and in the evening, the rain came again. I loved to sit by the window with a glass of whiskey, watch the drops run down the glass, and listen to how autumn whispers its stories. At such moments, I felt the passage of time especially keenly. Catherine sat down next to him. You think a lot, she said one day. It hardly matters anymore. Everything matters as long as we are alive. I chuckled. You always talk as if you know something that I don't. Maybe so, she smiled. Olivia came every 2 weeks. She brought us food, medicine, and told us news. Everything is the same in the city, she said. Nothing changes. She tried not to show how worried she was, but I saw it in her eyes. Time flowed like sand through your fingers. I was getting weaker every day, but I didn't complain. I didn't need pity. I knew that I was leaving the way I wanted in my home, among my people, without tubes, without machines, without the pain caused by treatment. One night I woke up to Catherine crying quietly. Don't, I whispered, pulling her towards me. I don't want to lose you. This is beyond our power. She nodded, but the tears continued to flow. I ran my hand through her hair, feeling its softness. I don't regret anything, I said. I had a good life, and the best thing about her is you. She hugged me tightly. Today is the day I feel it. And here I am sitting in a cozy chair. Catherine brings me back from my memories, holds my hand, and quietly whispers. I love you, she says quietly. I squeeze her hand tighter and answer, I love you even more. Alice. When I left Josh, my heart sank, but my mind insisted that I was making the right choice. I convinced myself that the life I had always dreamed of awaited me. Neon lights of night cities, leisurely breakfasts on the balconies of expensive hotels, the rustle of band notes and elegant handbags, endless possibilities. I believed that this is what happiness looks like. Harry was the embodiment of this dream, tall, confident, with the impeccable posture of a man accustomed to the world bending to his desires. A slight mockery shone in his eyes, as if he knew something inaccessible to others. He knew how to speak in such a tone that every word he said seemed like a promise. Harry was the one who never asked, but simply took. He surrounded me with luxury that took my breath away. Diamonds, the splash of champagne in crystal glasses, the softness of Italian leather on the seats of his car. I bathed in this shine, believing that I had found what I was missing. Josh couldn't give me all of this. He was simple, sincere, too real. His love was quiet, warm, like the soft light of a candle in a room warming, but lacking a dazzling glow. I wanted more. I wanted to burn, and not just warm myself. But a few years later, I realized that I had destroyed not just a marriage, I had destroyed my soul. At first, everything was like a fairy tale. Expensive restaurants, trips to Europe, outfits that I chose without looking at the price tags. Harry took me to social events where I was introduced as his date. I looked in the mirror and saw a completely different person, not the girl who once danced in the bar with Josh, laughing carefree, but a woman who tried to fit into a new life, even if something inside was shrinking from emptiness. For a long time, I convinced myself that I did the right thing. I told myself that Josh was a good person, but his world was too small for me, that I deserve more. Harry's problems began unnoticed, almost on the sly. First, some telephone conversations, after which he left the room with a tense face. Then there were rare outbursts of irritation when he thought I couldn't see. He still smiled at me with his usual carefree smile, but I felt that something was changing. A strange sparkle appeared in his eyes, not the one that attracted me at the beginning, but some kind of anxious, feverish one. I didn't ask. I didn't want to destroy the world I had so easily entered into. I enjoyed life, expensive restaurants, travel, brilliant parties where everyone knew each other, but no one trusted anyone. It was a fairy tale in which I did not want to notice the dark spots. But one day the fairy tale collapsed. It all started with news short notes in business publications about inspections, legal proceedings, frozen accounts. I didn't understand the full extent of the disaster until I saw Harry smash his phone against the wall, cursing someone on the other end of the line. At that moment, it dawned on me. He was no longer in control of the situation. He assured me that everything was under control, that these are temporary difficulties, that he will solve the issue. I clung to these words like a drowning person clinging to the wreckage of a ship. But the ship was already sinking, and then he just disappeared. One day I woke up to an empty house, without him, no money, with no way to fix what I got myself into. The phone was silent. The cards were blocked. The friends with whom I laughed over a glass of champagne no longer answered their calls. Harry fled abroad, leaving me in the ruins of my brilliant world with debts, a dirty reputation, and the desperate realization that I had nowhere to go. I thought my friends would help, that the people I went to dinner with would open doors for me, but as soon as I found myself in trouble, those doors slammed shut. I became nothing to them. Moreover, they avoided me as if I were contagious. Those who had recently smiled admiringly at me now turned away. I realized that all this time I was only a part of Harry for them. Without him, I ceased to exist. The first time I thought about Josh after everything had happened, I didn't immediately understand why. I tried to convince myself that these were just memories, that I don't miss him, but just feel sorry for myself. But every day I realized I didn't just make a mistake. I betrayed the only person who truly loved me. I decided to write to him. Short messages first, then long, full of remorse. He didn't answer. I didn't give up, hoping that he would at least listen to me. And then I decided to go to him, to the house that was once ours, to the house that I left without hesitation or regret. When he came out, I didn't recognize him right away. He looked different, stronger, calmer. He was no longer the man I left, and I was no longer the woman he loved. I spoke, poured out everything that had accumulated in my heart. She told me how she made a mistake, how she was deluded, how she thought that happiness awaited me, but found only emptiness. He listened in silence. I hoped for anything, for anger, for pain, for reproach. But when he spoke, his voice was flat, almost cold. "It's not me you want, Alice," he said. "You need what I can give you." But this is no longer the case, just like us. I wanted to object, to say that this is not so, that I love him, that I don't need money, that I just want to be close to him again. But deep down, I knew he was right. When the door closed in front of me, I was left standing on the porch, feeling the emptiness growing in my chest. That was the end. The end of a fairy tale that never happened. The end of a dream that turned out to be a hoax. The end of my last hope. Many years have passed since then. They flashed by, leaving traces of what I had experienced on my face, like wrinkles around the eyes, fatigue in my gaze, a shadow of regret, which I learned to hide behind everyday worries. I was no longer looking for easy ways, no longer chasing the brilliance of someone else's life. I had to learn to live again. I still found a job, albeit not prestigious, but stable. I rented a small apartment, modest, but my own. Every morning I made coffee and looked out the window, trying not to think about the past. I convinced myself that it was easier this way, which is so right. But you can't hide from yourself. Memories of Josh came back in the quietest moments when night fell over the city and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, or when I walked into a store and caught a glimpse of the scent of his favorite soap, simple and fresh smelling. Every autumn, when the rain rustled on the roofs, I thought about him. I myself destroyed everything that was truly valuable. Now I know the price of betrayal. She turned out to be taller than I could have imagined. It's not just loneliness. It's an emptiness that you can't hide from, no matter how hard you try. I pay for my choices every minute, every fall, when the leaves fall as a reminder that time cannot be turned back, and I will have to pay this price for the rest of my days. Thank God it won't be long. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.